a vision of one decentralized, interoperable metaverse, but that does not exist obviously at the moment, and it raises a lot of legal questions. Obviously Facebook, Meta works on it, and those with a lot of power may have the opportunity to get into that, but is a internet or the internet and the metaverse, can that be owned by someone, or is it more like common heritage of mankind? And then, considering that we have several different systems in our world, we already know that China is currently working on its own metaverse from a state perspective. And therefore, if you talk about this one metaverse, this would of course cause several and very complex regulatory questions, because to find a consensus among all players to find answers to the legal question seems to be very complex. On the other hand, imagine we have competing metaverses. This will have huge antitrust aspects about accessibility, also about ownership questions, the operability of data. Do I have just one identity in several metaverses, or do I have several identities, or can I combine these data? And why do we care about all these things, which are, I think, very, very interesting and maybe a little bit philosophic and as a vision, but this has a huge impact on our daily lives and also on our commercial life. I mean, everyone who has kids knows maybe about Fortnite. The kids tell us, okay, this already exists for many years. We have the creative mode where you can play with others and you can create something that is then accessible to others. So a certain platform exists already for quite a time. So the metaverse has his origin in the gaming industry. But also pilots, engineers, doctors, all can be trained in a metaverse. Consumers can try clothes, for example, and it's not only like in the internet ordering something, but you can really check, does that fit? You can have in real-time advice from several people at the same time sitting around a table, showing, explaining certain technology. And for me, maybe one of the, and we spoke about that, maybe one of the most impressive and what persuaded me that metaverse is there to stay examples is if you look at fairs with huge machineries, and people have to transport these machineries to Singapore, Thailand, Turkey, wherever they have to show that. And imagine it would be easy. You invite your customer to come and join you and to access these machineries in a room, in a private room. Of course, trade secrets have to be protected, and to inspect that in a three-dimensional way, and you can directly speak with that person. When I heard the story, I felt like, wow, yeah, you save money, you save so many things, timing, that has a huge impact.
So let's say you buy a nice shirt for $100 and you can only use it in one metaverse. And let's say that's a professional metaverse you use for working. At home you can't wear it. Well, that's bad, right? How much are you willing to pay for it? If you cannot transfer the assets and the right to wear a shirt from one metaverse to another one, the value drops significantly, right? And you would have to buy it again and again. And so what really happens is we need to think about how can we transfer assets. And there are three questions that come to my mind that lawyers might have to answer one day. So one is related to property rights. Who owns that asset? If I own it, must I not be allowed to take it from one metaverse to another one? Who can stop me, right? If I own something, how could you say you're not allowed to use it here? The second thing is marketability. At the moment, the major platforms, they don't want you to resell items, right? You buy something and you don't use it, right? But it has to be some markets that have to be there that follow other norms. And if it's one firm that operates the metaverse or multiple, they have to think about what can happen. So there should be metaverse one where I can buy a product and I can resell it in another metaverse. How does that even begin to work if these are firms? They need to have some rules, terms and conditions, right? But if they say, hey, you're not allowed to, buy a Microsoft product or sell a Microsoft product here because we are called Apple, how does that even work? And how will it limit it? And third is going to be intellectual property. Who owns things that are invented in one metaverse? And let's keep the correspondence between metaverse and universe. So In our universe, if someone invents something, I believe that person should have the right to have the IP. And no one should take it away. You know much better. And it should even be regardless of in which country you invented. If you invented it, it should be yours. But what about a metaverse? If the metaverse is the equivalent of a universe, would an IP in one metaverse automatically imply to have it in another one? If it's all tied to our universe, yes, it should. But if those are separate, maybe not. How does it even work to transfer IP from one metaverse to another? What if we have multiple metaverses which do not communicate in the way that they should?
The platform provider will not take the entire risk. So they will have in their general terms and conditions some kind of transferring any liability they would face from the outside transferred to their users. And this will of course trigger then some follow-on questions. To what extent can they pass on the liability for some behaviors?
And that the same might be true for IP liabilities.
Yeah.
If there arises an IP liability in a supply chain, how can they be passed on to the next customer? And so what do you think, Nicolas, should be done from IP perspective?
Yeah, you already mentioned it. General terms and conditions of platforms, we already have that with respect to the internet. So this is also not a new area of applicability or a topic that concerns us from a legal perspective. However, also with respect to the metaverse, we absolutely need respective risk coverage through robust terms and conditions which address these IP infringement risks that can play a role here. For example, think about content, copyright infringing content that is uploaded to the metaverse or to the platform. And of course, platform operators want to make sure that the liability that comes therefrom is somehow shared with the users that are responsible for these kinds of uploads.
Claims which have already been raised with respect to the metaverse. Andrea, give some examples in that respect.
The metaverse, as of now, I think it's being treated more or less as the internet. So basically, the court is trying to handle cases as if they had happened on the internet, or as if they happened on a gaming platform, basically. Because let's be honest, now 90% of the users in the metaverse mirror those of a gaming platform. However, since the goal of the metaverse is basically to mirror real life, and we may evolve from avatars to, you were talking about holograms, and so our persona would enter the metaverse in an increasing way. I think that also the temperature may rise in relation to litigation.
Legitimating yourself with your ID in the front of your laptop, that's probably not something that the community would accept. So really that concept of creating trust from technology, I think will be really a key driver there. And then I can think you can look at the blockchain technology as a kind of enabling technology, an underlying